Just goes to show that crime really doesn't pay. Roll the credits. Hello all and welcome to another edition of An English Undertaking. Today we're going to be looking at a famous funeral that happened in 1995, that of the gangster of the 1960s, Ronald Kray, Ron or Ronnie, as he was sometimes known, one half of the infamous Kray twins, who, as I say, were gangsters in the East End of London in the 1950s and 60s. So before we get into this video, I just want to say a big thank you to everybody who watched the previous video, and that was my book review of Mumblings of a Mortician by the now sadly departed Peter Stefan. I got quite a lot of positive response to the video, so thank you very much. In fact, one of the author's wives even left a comment in the comment box, so that was nice. Also, while I'm doing kind of mentions and shout outs and whatever, I want to thank Lockdown Legs. Not too sure of their real name, but they messaged again that they watched and appreciate the video, but they are going for a job interview soon in the funeral profession. So we exchanged a few messages, and I hope the advice I gave was of use. But good luck with the job interview. I hope it all comes off, and you know, if you get in, then fantastic. You've got a job for life, and one I'm sure you'll cherish. So welcome to the funeral business. So on the 17th of March 1995, the infamous gangster Ronnie Kray passed away in Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, where he was a patient, because you can't use the word prisoner, because technically it's a hospital, not a prison, for the criminally insane. In fact, I tell a lie, he collapsed in Broadmoor of a heart attack, chest pains. I'm not too sure whether it was kind of angina related or not. It was heart related. Anyway, he collapsed in his room in Broadmoor, was taken to a nearby hospital, but sadly died. And that was the end of a legend of the criminal underworld here in the UK. So if you're watching this from abroad, you know, whether America or wherever, and you don't know who the Kray twins are, let me just give you a brief kind of history of Ronnie and Reggie Kray. They were identical twins, born during the Second World War in the East End of London in Bethnal Green, which was then quite a deprived and poor area of the city. They very quickly grew a reputation of being quite tough, hard men. They both trained as boxers. The rumour is Reggie, had he stuck at it, could have been a professional fighter and not a criminal, whereas Ronnie, because he wasn't well, he couldn't control his temper in the ring, so the discipline wasn't there. Ronnie Kray was a certified paranoid schizophrenic, so he wasn't a well man. And of course, back in the 40s and the 50s, psychiatric and mental illness was not something that is really talked about like it is today. So there was a stigma attached to it. and he possibly didn't get the help he needed as quickly as he needed. The Kray twins went on to become nightclub owners, earning quite a reputation for throwing lavish parties at their nightclubs, often attracting celebrities such as Diana Dawes, Barbara Windsor. I think Princess Margaret even frequented one of their clubs in the West End of London during the 1960s. But as well as their kind of celebrity status as club owners, there was a more sinister side to the twins. Both Ronnie and Reggie were hardened criminals. They were gangsters, basically. They ran protection rackets and operated their criminal business with fear, violence, and sheer terror. And there was a lot of people that were really scared of the Kray twins. And they ruled the good portion of London, the East and the West End, with complete, freedom. The police couldn't really touch them. Nobody wanted to snitch on them. So they were living the life of Riley in the criminal underworld as, these celebrity gangsters. However, in the late 60s, that all came to an end when the pair were arrested for the murders of George Cornell, who Ronnie shot in the Blind Beggar pub in front of a load of people. And Reggie stabbed to death Jack the Hat McVitie at a party in a house somewhere in London. I should kind of point out that although I'm not condoning what they did, because obviously what they did was wrong and should never have happened, the two people in question, George Cornell and Jack McVitie, were no angels. The two of them were both hardened criminals themselves. They were both gangsters. They both lived a life where they knew at any moment could end in violence, and unfortunately for them, it did. So Ronnie died on the 17th of March. He was buried on the 28th, or maybe the 20th or 29th of March in 1995. He was given one of the largest funerals the entire country had ever seen since the death of Winston Churchill. His funeral was literally fit for a king. It was so big, a private security firm was employed to manage the situation, as well as the Metropolitan Police. And the interesting story to the private security firm is this. The funeral parlour where Ronnie Kray was resting in the Chapel of Rest was W.E. English and Son on Bethnal Green Road in the East End of London, so not too far from where the twins lived and worked. Ronnie's body was there. Unfortunately, the funeral home started receiving death threats. People were saying, not everybody is a Kray twin fan. If you do this funeral, we will basically come and set fire to the funeral parlour with Ronnie Kray's body inside it. Reggie got wind of this because obviously the funeral director rang the prison where Reggie was staying, spoke to Reggie, because Reggie, as Ron's next of kin, as his twin brother, was organising the funeral. They basically told them what had happened, so Reggie said, leave it with me. Reggie got in touch with an already fairly well-known villain called Dave Courtney. And Dave Courtney had been visiting both Ronnie and Reggie for a while. And he struck up a friendship with the twins. Dave had a security firm, so he controlled the pubs and clubs doors. He provided bouncers and doormen for nightclubs and pubs, basically. There's also a couple of other things he was involved in, debt collecting, house clearance, shall we say. Just think about that one, and you'll draw your own conclusions. So he was a man who A, had the muscle behind him, and B, knew what was what with regards to the criminal underworld. So Reggie employed him to manage the security for Ronnie's funeral, which of course is what he did. Dave took it to the next level. As well as providing security for the funeral on the day, he actually provided security for the funeral home as well. So for the 2 weeks before the funeral, Dave Courtney stayed in the chapel of rest with Ronnie Kray's body to make sure that nobody would try and steal the body or vandalize the funeral home or do anything disrespectful and unsavory to both Ronnie Kray's body and the funeral home. So Dave stayed in the chapel of rest with Ronnie Kray, and he had a couple of his guys outside, kind of keeping watch, or keeping Dixie, as they say in London. So it was a pretty safe place to be quite honest with you. On the day of the funeral itself, the East End of London was packed, and the streets were lined with thousands of people, all wishing to pay their respects to Ronnie Kray. Now, you might be asking yourself, why would all those people want to turn out for the funeral of a gangster? Not only a gangster, a murderer, and somebody who in his day was a brutal person. He wasn't, well, to his enemies anyway, Ronnie Kray was not a nice person at all. The trouble is, you could very quickly become Ronnie Kray's enemy at the drop of a hat, and sometimes you wouldn't even know why. But that was because the man wasn't well. He had a psychiatric illness that was very poorly controlled. Sometimes not controlled at all. So it was quite easy to make an enemy of Ronnie Kray, and if that was to happen, you just needed to leave the country, basically. But the fascination with the Kray twins had built up for all these years since their heyday, and obviously after. And we've all got this kind of morbid curiosity, haven't we, where we like to look into things that we shouldn't really look at. It's almost like driving past a car crash, on the side of the road. You shouldn't look, but you really want to. You can't help yourself. And that is the same that's said for gangsters and serial killers and this, that and the other. But the myth and the legend surrounding the Krays was so huge that people turned out for his funeral. And there was a lot of people in the East End that weren't criminals that knew the Kray twins. So there was a whole mixture of different people turning up for different reasons. And like I said, the streets were absolutely packed. He had a couple of hearses. Ronnie Kray himself travelled in a horse-drawn hearse from the funeral parlour to the church where a service was given, and then onto the cemetery where he was buried alongside his mother Violet, who died in 84, I believe. That was the only time Ronnie Kray was actually released from Broadmoor, was to attend his mum's funeral. But since then, he'd been locked away in Broadmoor. As well as the thousands of people that turned out to see Ronnie Kray on his final journey, also Reggie Kray was released from prison for that day as well. Again, the only time he'd been released was, for his mother's funeral back in the 80s, along with Ron. And even then, crowds, packed the streets for Violet Kray's funeral. I don't think to pay respects to Violet, although Violet Kray was a very well respected and loved member of the community of Bethnal Green and in the East End of London. I think the majority of people wanted to get a glimpse of the infamous Kray twins. They were expecting to see two giant men, fierce looking, where the reality is they were far from it. They were both quite short. Ronnie Kray was only 5'7". I think Reggie, being his twin, was probably the same height. And time hadn't been kind to them in prison, and you can imagine it wouldn't be to anyone. So the image that people had in their head and what they actually saw in reality were completely different. So Reggie was allowed to attend Ron's funeral, and of course a lot of people attended Ron's funeral to see Reggie. And of course there was the usual people there that had been associated with the Krays for a long time. Mad Frankie Fraser, Freddie Foreman, and a few others as well. They'd all turned up to see Reg and lend his support. What the authorities did to Reggie that day was quite cruel. They'd handcuffed him to a prison officer who must have been about 6'5". He was absolutely massive. Reggie was only the same height as me, 5'7". So compared to a guy who's about 6'5", Reggie looked like, the little old man that he'd actually become, which really angered him, because of course, looking back at the photographs of the funeral, because it was all in the papers, it was all over the news and the media. Looking back, he saw this great big burly prison officer, and then himself next to him, this little old grey-haired man. I thought it was quite a cruel trick to play, because there was no way Reggie would have ever attempted to escape, because I think it would have been impossible. There was just far too many people there. It wouldn't have been possible, and the police were everywhere as well. And they had him handcuffed for the entire service. Admittedly, he did get to stand in the church next to Ron's coffin and lay his hand on top, and he also was permitted to attend the actual burial service of Ron. So again, you can see the pictures on the news. If you go onto YouTube and Google it, you'll see it for yourself. The cemetery was absolutely packed as well. But he was allowed to attend the actual burial service and lay flowers on top of Ron's coffin as he was lowered into the ground. And that was it, really. It was a normal funeral with very, very unusual circumstances surround it, and quite a unique character at the heart of it. Had it been anybody else, it'd have just been a normal kind of funeral that, you know, I see every single day of the week. But because of who he was, because of the infamy and all the tales and the stories around it, you know, it was, like I said, it was something that hadn't really been seen since Winston Churchill's funeral. And that was pretty big as well. So there you have it. Once Ron was laid to rest, Reggie was escorted back to prison, where he remained there up until 2001, where he was released 6 weeks before his death. So there we go. So that was this week's video. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you have, give it a thumbs up, a like, share it with friends, family and whoever. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, turn on the bell notifications to be notified when new videos are released. I'm trying to do, at the moment, I'm trying to do one a week. Sometimes that's easier said than done. Yeah, I think in the next video I will cover Reggie Kray's funeral. Done Ron's, might as well do Reggie's. So stay tuned for that. If you're interested, the book I was reading, or the book I'm currently reading at the moment, is One of the Family, 40 Years with the Krays, by Maureen Flanagan, who was actually Violet Kray's hairdresser. And in case you're wondering, that's Violet Kray there. That is Ronnie and Reggie when they were younger and they were boxers. I've just started this book. I've actually had it for quite a while, but I've only just started to read it. It's already a really interesting read. So that's the book, and you can buy it in all good bookshops. I'll probably do a review of this as well at some stage, so keep an eye out for that. But until the next time, I will see you soon. Take care and thanks for watching. Bye-bye.